advancing the discussion on distributive justice, what I found in my work as an attorney, as well as a member of the Planning Committee of the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network, is that community organizations don't look at environmental justice as we want to put this environmental harm in someone else's community. What I found, what I've seen, what I know, is that the civil rights groups that I've seen are working to lower environmental risk for everyone. So it's another way for us to think about distributive justice and how we move forward to that goal of environmental justice. And panel, the question that I'm going to put to you is, how do you reduce environmental risk for everyone in the work that you do and in what you've seen? And I'm going to let y'all think about that, and I'll share something with you about how I've seen it in my state. Back in 2006, there were proposals for 4 mega landfills in the state of North Carolina. Now, we have to get rid of our trash. We have to figure out whether or not we're going to increase recycling, whether we're going to compost more, whether we're going to have less packaging. But in 2006, there were proposals for mega landfills, ones that North Carolina had never seen before, that were going to hold twice as much waste, that were going to be actually located along the North Carolina coast. And as we've been talking about today, there's an issue with hurricanes. There's an issue with coastal communities being sometimes under the water table. So there's a lot of dangers from the idea of siting a landfill on the coast. And we were going to have 4 really big ones. They were going to be located along our coast, and they were going to accept trash from all along the eastern coast of the United States. So there was quite an outcry. And in terms of collaborative relationships, what started happening was that natural resources organizations who were very concerned about wildlife refuges and state parks and state game lands along our coast began to work with justice organizations who were concerned about the fact that there are already a disproportionate number of landfills sited in communities of color. Well, now they're going to be possible for them to be even bigger. They were going to be huge. So these organizations got together and asked the state to put a halt on permitting for facilities. And there was a 1-year moratorium. There was formed a joint select committee on environmental justice. There was a study committee for all sorts of other solid waste issues in our state. After a year of study, what happened, and what I think of as a great example of collaboration and how environmental risk is reduced for everyone, is that there was a complete overhaul of North Carolina solid waste management law. In that bill, there's actually a provision that says that a solid waste facility shall not be sited if it will cause a disparate impact on communities protected by Title VI of our Civil Rights Act. So that's protection. So that's protection from discrimination on the basis of race. That's written into state law in the state of North Carolina. In addition, there are a number of buffers that are by law between landfills and certain natural resources. So we get in that law, there are lots of other provisions that are a part of it, but the way that it got passed was as a collaboration. It was a collaboration between traditional natural resources organizations, civil rights organizations, and it resulted in a reduction in environmental risk for everyone. Landfills cannot be but so big now in the state of North Carolina. They can't be located really close to certain natural resources, and there's real consideration of the impact of landfills on people of color. So, that's an example that I think is how we can try to reduce risk for everyone and get toward our goal of environmental justice. So, panelists, I wanted to give you all some time to think about how your work reduces environmental risk for everyone. And is there anyone who'd like to take on the question first?
I guess I'll start. I don't think I have a good example of what I've actually accomplished because I have not yet passed prelims. So that's the whole purpose of my research project, is looking at how environmental risks currently are distributed based upon where people are located in the city. And I guess I want to touch upon not just the fact that there's a local solution, but then sometimes our local solutions become a global problem. And a part of Mr. Howard's vision for URBAANE is getting us to understand that our decisions that we make here, think local, act local, think global, is that you may have made a decision that saves Chicago, but you just compromised here in Indiana, or Hammond, Indiana, or possibly St. Louis. And that what we do here should be mirrored in other cities. So I think, what I have to contribute to the answer is that it's not just us that are affected by environmental justice here in the United States, that we have brown brothers and sisters all across the globe that are suffering injustices from our decisions to be safer and putting them in compromised positions because of economic, they don't have money, so they get paid to take out waste that is killing them, waste that is polluting their water and ruining their culture and killing their babies and all of those things that eventually will cycle back around to us. So as we discuss our solutions locally, let us, remember that we're not in this alone, and that, the placement of Walmarts and big business and supporting those types of activities, buying cell phones, all of our actions have consequences, and that they are global consequences. We don't just have climate events here in Chicago because we're Chicago. Everything is connected. So I just wanted to make that.
Are there any questions that people have thus far about any of the comments that our panelists have thus far? Yes, sir? Yes, sir. Please come to the mic for your questions.
Good evening, all.
Good evening.
My name is Pastor Joel Washington. I am campus minister for This Walk by Faith on campus, which is the campus ministry of the Evangelical Lutheran Church, coming out of the South Conference African American Strategy. Okay, so I'm pleased to be here this afternoon, and my question, in terms of a comment, one of the best things I've ever heard John Hope Franklin, the Dean of African American Historians, say is that this notion of the Underground Railroad and its impact on African Americans' freedom is very much overstated. He said that, this is one of his last interviews, he said African Americans themselves, and I'm getting to a point here, left the plantations.
Right.
Okay? And the largest movement away from the plantations north were from individual African Americans making a decision on their own to opt for freedom.
Right.
The Underground Railroad had a small role to play in the actual flow of African Americans in the path of freedom. Du Bois himself states, in his own understanding of in Black Reconstruction, he said that African Americans conducted what could only be called a general strike in the South. They laid down their tools and crippled the South in terms of its production during the Civil War.
Absolutely right.
Not to mention the African Americans flowing to join the Union Army. My point here is that African Americans, and John Hope Franklin's book, From Slavery to Freedom, that is a movement of African Americans, by African Americans, for African Americans. And what I'm trying to say here is that before we, or in conjunction with building coalitions, we need to build an alliance of unity within the Black community.
Correct.
We have the power within us to address all the issues that confront us.
Correct.
And this question of environmental justice has to begin by unifying all the elements in our community. And this is not to say we already have the knowledge. Just because we are Black doesn't mean that we know Black.
Right.
Black is color, consciousness, and color, culture, and consciousness.
Right.
Okay? And so we can't confuse being Black with knowing Black.
Right.
And so we need to refresh our minds and of our history and understand that we have always made the first strike towards freedom, and we make the final blow of freedom. And so key to addressing this issue is African American unity, African American alliance of the diverse forces within the Black community, and then building coalitions with others of like mind and similar circumstance. I needed to emphasize that because the discussion was about how do we reach out to get funding. We have all the resources we need in the Black community to address our problem. And I just wanted to lay that out as an alternative concern vis-a-vis going out to get monies from those people from a position of weakness rather than a position of strength. Once we're mobilized, they'll come to us.
And y'all must have tweeted the pastor and told him I asked for him this morning, right? But I just want to say, when I said we need to get back to the roots of responsibility, I agree 100% with the whole message, the whole sermon that you just gave. But the issue in both situations that you talked about is not relegating responsibility and not then holding people accountable for that which they are responsible for. I don't care if it's me. If I'm in a leadership position or I have my degrees, to whom do I owe? You see what I'm saying? To whom do I owe? And for those who watch Boondocks, I'm on that rider. You gonna pay what you owe. All right? So the bottom line is, our community, because of complacency, we do wait for this Savior. There's this Savior mentality, as opposed to realizing God has already given you all the power that you need, all the resources that you need, but you have to be responsible to utilize those resources. And when we see someone in our community wear a good suit, or we feel they graduated, we leave the responsibility to them and say, well, they're going to do it. Then when they're not right, when there are backdoor deals going on, when they want to form their own new old boys and old girls networks, we don't hold them responsible. We do not call them out and say this is unacceptable, your behavior, and we're not going to tolerate it. We're removing you from that position then, and we're going to put in people who are accountable, responsible, and paid who they owe, which are those who came before them. So that is part of the dynamic we're missing when we talk about this. All of these granting agents, all of these partners and collaborators do not respect you until you respect yourself. And I'm telling you what I know, not what I think. This is not theory. This is what I live. There are a lot of people who've done their utmost best to operate within a new system of COINTELPRO to try to get me removed, try to get me shut down, try to shut my mouth. People try to invite me to lunch dinners and everything else to try to see if there was a way to buy me. I'm not for sale, I'm not a slave. Okay? So the thing is when they realize that, that tells you then you have voice, you have power, and they're afraid of it, so they want to co-opt it. You have to then stick and stay, and then do the work. It's not about sitting down. Like you said, it's not about becoming complacent. It's not about relaxing. And trust me, when you do it without their resources, then they come and say to you, they come and say, you are in a position of power and we need to work with you. We now need to collaborate. We now need to share resources. We now need to be on a research team. You see what I'm saying? But we have to work from within our own communities first. My feeling never got plowed by me praying to hold out the cabinet and saying, come on out and go in that field now. Ain't never happened. So you cannot just sit there. That is good, but at some point, as our ancestor now, Philip Simmons said, at some point, you got to stop praying and get up off your knees and do something. So we can't pray for someone else to come in and save. We are the ones we've been waiting for, as the song says. So that's the point. We can say, who else ain't doing what? Ask yourself, what am I doing? And who am I doing it for? Is it only for me, or is it for we? So when we get there, then our communities will be healed and be changed on all levels and in all circles. Peace and blessings. So how many children do idea in the president office at CSU up in Chi-Town? And this is the one we form boys, and they're from Anderson, South Kakalaki, and Roots Geechee. But then he asked me, but we got a Geechee flag. So I want to crack my teeth and let Hunter children know what a flag means. Now Hunter to see ya, we be Gullah Geechee, anointed people. We are, we have been, we continue to be. When you speak the Gullah language, it is devoid of time and space. So you have a continuum that goes on. It's not just about this moment. So you have the we be announced there. Gullah is people blessed by God. And this comes from our ancestry, both of the Angolans, which were the first groups of Africans kidnapped and brought into the Sea Island region because of their blacksmithing skill. And when they would sell Angolans at markets like Charleston, South Carolina was the #1 enslavement auction block in North America, they would announce it on the records. We have a cargo of Gullah for sale. So you had the corruption of the word Angola that first brought Gullah into use in North America. But later, they started kidnapping people from the Windward Coast, Rice Coast region of the motherland, Africa, which was once called Alkebulan, that were named Gola, G-O-L-A. Right adjacent to those people, the Gola, were the Geechee, G-I-D-Z-I. So the Gullah and Geechee ethnic groups who are rice producers, Carolina gold rice, came in, they feel, from Madagascar. But the people who mastered it in this land were Gullah Geechees. And so in the Gullah Geechee Nation, all of the people, whether they're Igbo, Mandinka, Malinke, Yoruba, Gola, Geechee, Mendi, Temni, Feet, that ended up being enslaved in our Sea Island region to work cotton, rice, and indigo, ended up being called Gullahs or Geechees, even though their original ethnic groups might not have been Gola or Geechee. So you have here, we are and continue to be and will be and have been people blessed by God that also of Gullah Geechee ancestry. And because we've survived all we have, we know we are anointed by God to still be here. And so our flag, the blue, we believe the water to bring me up, the water going to take me back. So the blue represents the Middle Passage, the waters, the rivers that surround our islands. It also represents indigo, that crop that was one of the 3 major cash crops. The gold represents also a cash crop, the Carolina gold, but the biggest commodity was called black gold, black cargo, us, that was sold at these auction blocks. The green represents the land, you see, and that land that we're still holding on to, that land that our ancestors even came from, that their blood, sweat, and tears is still in. And you see in the center of the circle, we are always in the circle because we are all still always connected by the Creator. You see that this family tree is a traditional West African family tree. It is human bodies intertwined. So we're always inextricably tied to one another. We can never be separated from one another when we say we Gullah Geechee. So that's why even though he did way up here in Chi-Town, he ain't separated from we back yonder in South Kakalaki. And I'm so glad for be at CSU and for all of we in the Gullah Geechee Nation. God bless you. Peace and blessings.
Sister, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
You have stated that Geechee is now, it's a derivative of the true African word, which was
Geechee, G-I-D-Z-I.
But being that we were not allowed to write.
Right, yes. In 1739, due to the Stono Rebellion that took place in South Carolina, one of the largest planned insurrections, as they call it, of African people, you had a man named Cato. They wrote of him called Jemmy, who was an Angolan, who led the Stono Rebellion because Carolina, there was no North and South yet, existed, and La Florida existed. Georgia didn't exist. It was just a buffer zone. But La Florida was occupied by the Spanish, while the British were trying to occupy Carolina. Well, the Spanish king sent out a word that said, any, quote, Negro that shall escape Carolina, make it to La Florida, and convert to Catholicism, shall be manumitted and given arms and land. Well, when this was pronounced and announced, and Cato and those found out, Cato got some 20 plus Angolan men to make their drums again, make their weaponry, and they started marching. And all accounts say they were marching, beating the drums, saying, Liberty, 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 on their way to Gracia Real de Santa Teresa de Mose, which is Fort Mose in St. Augustine today. Because of some of them getting caught en route, because of the militias coming down on them and then killing them as an example of what you should not do, there was a scare, as they call it, through the colonies that caused them to say, well, you know what? We need laws against this. We can't have the Africans reading or writing. We can't have them playing the drum. We can't have them owning land. So because of the 1740 slave codes that now prevented people of African descent from reading and writing, because they could before that, in their languages of their own home and the languages of trade, all right? Now there was a ban, no reading, no writing by Africans. And because of all the years of that, people no longer spell Geechee, G-I-D-Z-I, as it originally was. They started to spell it phonetically later on, so it becomes Geechee, G-E-E-C-H-E-E over here. Just like with Gullah, it's no longer G-O-L-A like it's still found in West Africa. It is now G-U-L-L-A-H. But now when linguists break down the spelling of Gullah, they actually find that this spelling means people blessed by God. And it got to be a blessing to survive all that.
That's when you made reference to, I think you call it yellow gold or
Carolina gold.
Carolina gold. And
Yes.
that is the rice?
That's the rice. So the Sea Island cotton was a particular long staple cotton that we grew. Carolina, gold, rice, and indigo. Those were considered the 3 cash crops. But the biggest cash crop they exploited, of course, was us. And they wrote of us as black gold.
And that's why my grandmother always kept rice on my plate when I was a,
That's
when I was a
believable.
baby.
And you wasn't gonna marry no woman that didn't either.
That's right.
And that's the truth.
I know.
Cook
Thank
the
you,
rice.
Sister.
Thank you.
But you know what's even deep too? That's symbolic, Doc? This tree, that even in our school's logo, we have a tree.
Is that
And the
right?
fact that you brought a tree today has joined the two trees
The 2
together.
trees together.
Doc's tree at CSU, your tree
That's
in the Gullah
powerful.
Geechee Nation.
Mm-mm.